Hi, welcome to the fourth video in our People Problem series. Today we are looking at the problem of us versus them. So this video is happening at a really poignant time in our national dialogue. We are in the process of trying to remove Confederate monuments, which is ostensibly the problem, but of course the problem goes much deeper than that. And the results are protests and counter-protests and angry language and violence and even death in some cases. So in the middle of this very strong us versus them dynamic, we have rhetoric, which is telling us that the right thing to do is to pick a side. Pick your side, stand your ground, speak your truth. That's what it means to do the right thing right now. So knowing this is all happening, the rhetoric is there and the dynamic is there, I realize that what I'm about to say can be hard for some people to hear. But here it is. Anytime we engage in conflict, whichever side we are on, we are reinforcing the pattern of conflict. Inside of our participating in conflict, we are creating the seeds for that conflict to reemerge. That's because conflict itself is based on an experience of disempowerment. We engage in conflict when we feel as though we don't have power, our voice is not heard. The only way we can be heard is by finding an enemy and yelling at that enemy or attacking that enemy. So already conflict comes from an experience of disempowerment, but conflict also requires that there be a winner and a loser. So what happens when someone is already feeling disempowered and then loses in the conflict? Does that suddenly cure them of their experience of disempowerment? Of course not. It reinforces it. It makes it even more real for them and increases the pain of that. And they go back home and they live in that and they share it and they teach their children that. So that disempowerment does not stay down. It pops back up again and again. So even if we win a conflict, the victory is only short-lived. Even if we get that monument removed or we get that law passed or we chase off the enemy, they'll come back. So we're going to be engaging in a constant struggle of conflict. And if that's not what we want, then we have to choose a different path. And the path starts with realizing that the conflict that's happening out there in the world is the same as the conflict that's happening within us. That the person we see as the enemy, who we are fearful of or who we hate, represents to us a part of ourselves that we are fearful of or that we hate, a story that we don't want to be true about ourselves, but it is. It's true, and it's causing us pain. That story is almost always about victimhood. Now, some of us have literal stories of victimhood. We can point to a time in our lives when a person who was an authority violated us and we were not in a position to defend or protect ourselves. And so we discovered at an early age that we were vulnerable and easily violated. But others of us might have more subtle stories of where we were taught that we were not very valuable or our opinion wasn't worthwhile. Our voice was not listened to. Our opinions didn't matter. And so we have also learned that we don't really have much to stand on, which is another version of victimhood. But either way, at some point, you get ticked off that you're being treated like a victim, that your rights are being violated, your body's being violated. And so you want to react, and that comes out as anger, which can result in conflict. So, but that reaction isn't coming from strength or power. It doesn't create strength or power. It just creates more and more reaction. So if we don't want to live in the reaction, we have to choose action, which means we acknowledge the story within us. We allow ourselves to feel it and own it because it is true for us at that time. And then we heal it. And as we heal it, the story loses its power and the lie that it was holding begins to dissolve. And we discover that we are powerful, that we do have a voice. When we stand in our wisdom and in our stability and in our true compassion, our true nature, we have a voice that cannot be denied by anybody. And as we discover we move differently in the world, we also discover that the person we once thought was our enemy, we now recognize as someone similar to ourselves because they are struggling with the same kind of story we just healed. They're no longer a raving lunatic to us. They're someone who we understand and have compassion for. And because we come to them from that angle, we also offer the opportunity for them to heal their own story. And that is the way things change. And I say that not just from my own perspective, but as we look at generations and generations of peacemakers who have taught that this is the way to peace, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So I realize that this can be a very discouraging time, and it may be hard for us to imagine that peace is even possible when it seems as though, from a certain perspective, that we are losing ground. You know, we've spent a long time as a country trying to establish experiences of dignity and equality and safety and civility for everybody, and now it seems like we're losing ground. But that's only true if you tell the story from that perspective. Another way to understand the story is from the perspective of spiritual healing. And I'll tell you an example to help illustrate this. I once met with a lady who had a very traumatic childhood, but as an adult, she had established a really nice life for herself. She had a very stable family and a loving spouse, and she was very successful in her job. But now she was in her 50s, and she was discovering that the pain was surfacing. She was starting to have panic attacks and digestive problems, and she couldn't sleep at night. And she was really worried that she was cracking up, that she was losing ground that she had gained. But I told her, from my perspective, I thought that she had gotten to a point in her life where she had created such an environment of stability, and there were so many resources available to her, and she was so wise and compassionate herself, that I believed her soul was bringing the healing to the surface so that she could finish it. The deepest pain was now ready to be released. So instead of the pain representing the abyss that was sucking her down into the vortex, it became an invitation for her to climb the next mountain peak, to do that last bit of work to really increase her experience of freedom and joy. So applying that to our national situation, I believe that the reason we're having so much tumult right now, and it's all coming to the surface, is because right now we have the resources available to heal this pain, to heal this conflict. There are enough people in the world who are not picking sides because they're standing in the third way. They're the spiritual healers and the people who work with Reiki and the people who do meditation and yoga and all of those practices of peace. The faith people who are following seriously the words of the Buddha and the words of Jesus, the Christ. There are enough of us right now in the world committed to a path of peace that we can heal this. And that's why it's here, because the opportunity is ours. We just have to decide if we're going to do it. And we have to decide whether we're going to ask the right question, which isn't how do we beat Trump, but how do we save Trump? It isn't how do we overwhelm the Klan. It's how do we rescue them from their stories? And we start by rescuing ourselves from our own. So that's what I have to offer for today. I thank you for hanging in there, especially if it was difficult to listen to the whole piece. And I welcome your comments in the text box below the video. I do ask that you try to be as civil as possible. And I hope you'll join me next week when we start our next video series. Until then, be well. See you then.